Tuskegee Experiment stands as a stark reminder of the grave injustices inflicted upon poor and marginalized communities, whose bodies were exploited under the guise of medical research. Such acts underscore the deep-seated inequality and disregard for human dignity that must never be forgotten. In American history, certain events stand out as reminders of the profound injustices that have been inflicted upon marginalized communities. The Tuskegee Syphilis study, conducted between 1932 and 1972, is one such event, a glaring example of ethical misconduct, racial discrimination, and systemic abuse within the medical establishment. This study, deceptively orchestrated by the U.S. Public Health Service, PHS, observed the progression of untreated syphilis in African American men under the guise of providing free health care. The repercussions were devastating, leading to countless preventable deaths and a pervasive mistrust of medical institutions among African Americans that endures to this day. The early 20th century in the United States was marked by significant medical challenges and profound social inequalities. Among the most pressing public health concerns was syphilis, a sexually transmitted infection that, if left untreated, could lead to severe neurological, cardiovascular, and psychological complications. At that time, syphilis was rampant across the nation, affecting millions regardless of race or socioeconomic status. However, African American communities, particularly in the rural South, bore a disproportionate burden of the disease, exacerbated by poverty, limited access to health care, and systemic racism. In the backdrop of this health crisis, the U.S. Public Health Service sought to understand and control the spread of syphilis. Early treatment methods were rudimentary and often dangerous, relying on mercury and arsenic compounds that offered limited efficacy and severe side effects. The discovery of penicillin's effectiveness against syphilis would not occur until the 1940s, leaving a significant gap in effective treatment options. Amidst these circumstances, the PHS initiated several public health initiatives aimed at combating syphilis. One notable effort was the collaboration with the Rosenwald Fund in 1929, which aimed to provide treatment and education about syphilis to African American populations in the South. This program, although well-intentioned, was short-lived due to funding cuts during the Great Depression, leaving many communities without adequate support and care. From the data collected during these early interventions, PHS officials noted alarmingly high rates of syphilis among African Americans in Macon County, Alabama, a predominantly poor and rural region where the prestigious Tuskegee Institute was located. These findings, coupled with prevailing racist ideologies and a misguided pursuit of scientific knowledge, laid the groundwork for what would become the Tuskegee Syphilis Study. The study's architects posited that observing the natural progression of untreated syphilis in African American men would provide invaluable data for understanding the disease and improving public health outcomes. This rationale, however, was deeply flawed and ethically reprehensible. It was predicated on racist assumptions that African Americans were biologically different from whites and less deserving of ethical consideration, reflecting the broader context of Jim Crow-era discrimination and dehumanization. Dr. Taliaferro Clark, chief of the PHS Venereal Disease Division, initially proposed the study as a short-term project lasting 6 to 9 months. The intent was to monitor the disease's progression and conduct autopsies upon the subject's deaths to study the pathological effects of syphilis. However, as the study unfolded, it transformed into a long-term observational project that spanned 4 decades, continually exploiting and deceiving its participants. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study officially commenced in 1932, enrolling 600 African American men from Macon County. 399 with syphilis, and 201 as control subjects without the disease. The participants were primarily poor, uneducated sharecroppers who were vulnerable and easily exploited due to their socioeconomic status and limited access to medical care. The men were lured into the study with promises of free medical examinations, meals, and burial insurance, benefits that were highly enticing given their impoverished conditions. Crucially, they were never informed of their syphilis diagnosis. Instead, they were told they had bad blood, a vague term that encompassed various ailments common in the local vernacular. This deliberate deception denied them the ability to provide informed consent, a fundamental ethical requirement in medical research. Throughout the study, the PHS employed numerous unethical practices to maintain control and ensure the participants remained unaware of their true condition. Medical professionals involved in the study, including prominent figures like Dr. Raymond Vonderlehr and Nurse Eunice Rivers, perpetuated the deceit by fostering trust with the men while systematically withholding essential information and treatment. When penicillin was recognized as an effective cure for syphilis in the 1940s, the PHS made a conscious and calculated decision to deny treatment to the participants. This act was a profound violation of medical ethics and human rights, directly resulting in unnecessary suffering and death. The researchers went as far as to prevent the men from accessing syphilis treatment programs outside the study, ensuring the continuation of their unethical experiment. The study's protocols also included invasive and harmful procedures, such as painful spinal taps, which were presented to the participants as special free treatments. These procedures were conducted without proper explanation or consent, further exacerbating the exploitation and abuse endured by the men. Over the course of 40 years, the PHS continued to monitor the deteriorating health of the participants, publishing numerous reports and articles that omitted critical ethical considerations and humanized narratives. The study persisted unchecked, enabled by systemic racism, institutional complacency, and a disturbing prioritization of scientific data over human welfare. The human toll of the Tuskegee Syphilis study was immense and tragic. Deprived of appropriate diagnosis and treatment, many participants suffered the full spectrum of syphilis's devastating effects. They endured chronic pain, neurological impairments, cardiovascular complications, mental health issues, and, in many cases, premature death. All consequences that could have been prevented with timely medical intervention. The ramifications extended beyond the individual participants to their families and communities. The untreated disease was transmitted to spouses, and in some cases, congenital syphilis afflicted their children, leading to miscarriages, stillbirths, and severe lifelong disabilities. Entire families were plunged into cycles of suffering and hardship, compounding the generational impacts of poverty and discrimination. The emotional and psychological effects were equally profound. Many participants trusted the medical professionals who exploited them, believing they were receiving genuine care and support. The eventual revelation of the truth shattered this trust, leaving deep wounds of betrayal and trauma that resonated through families and communities. One notable participant, Charlie Pollard, joined the study believing he would receive treatment for his ailments. Decades later, upon learning the true nature of the study, Pollard became a vocal advocate for justice, joining lawsuits and speaking out against the atrocities committed. His story, among others, underscores the profound personal impacts and the resilience of those who sought accountability and recognition for their suffering. The Tuskegee Syphilis study is emblematic of the systemic racism and social injustices that have pervaded American society, particularly within the realms of healthcare and scientific research. The study was conceived and executed within a framework that devalued Black lives and perpetuated harmful racial stereotypes. The decision to target African American men in the rural South was not incidental, but rooted in deeply ingrained racist ideologies. the researchers operated under false and demeaning assumptions about Black sexuality, intelligence, and worthiness, viewing their subjects as inferior and expendable in the pursuit of knowledge ostensibly benefiting the broader white population. This exploitation was facilitated by broader societal structures that systematically disenfranchised African Americans, limiting their access to education, economic opportunities, and political power. The participants' poverty and lack of formal education made them particularly vulnerable to manipulation and abuse by authorities they had little reason to distrust. The study also reflected and reinforced the dehumanization of African Americans in medical contexts, a legacy traceable to slavery and manifest in numerous other instances of medical exploitation, such as involuntary sterilizations and unethical experiments. These practices contributed to a persistent narrative that Black bodies were available for exploitation and that their suffering was inconsequential. Moreover, the study's longevity and the complicity of numerous medical professionals and institutions highlight the pervasive nature of institutional racism. Despite evolving ethical standards and growing awareness of human rights, the study continued unabated for 4 decades, suggesting a systemic failure to recognize and rectify gross injustices against marginalized populations. The Tuskegee Syphilis study remained shrouded in secrecy until 1972, when Peter Buxton, a concerned PHS venereal disease investigator, blew the whistle on the ongoing atrocities. After raising concerns internally to no avail, Buxton leaked information to the press, leading to a groundbreaking article by Jean Heller of the Associated Press that brought the study into the national spotlight. The public reaction was one of widespread shock, horror, and outrage. Americans across racial and political spectrums condemned the study as a profound violation of ethical standards and human rights. The revelation ignited intense media scrutiny, political debates, and demands for accountability and justice. Civil rights organizations, medical associations, and community leaders called for immediate action, highlighting the study as a glaring example of systemic racism and abuse of power. The national discourse also delved into broader medical ethics issues, government oversight, and protecting vulnerable populations in research contexts. In response to the public outcry, the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, now the Department of Health and Human Services, launched an official investigation into the study's conduct. The resulting advisory panel unequivocally deemed the study unethical and unjustified, leading to its immediate termination. The exposure of the Tuskegee Syphilis study had far-reaching implications, prompting critical examinations of medical practices and research protocols nationwide. It catalyzed significant reforms aimed at preventing such egregious violations from occurring in the future. Following the study's termination, efforts to seek justice and redress for the victims and their families gained momentum. In 1973, a class action lawsuit was filed against the U.S. government on behalf of the study participants, leading to a $10 million settlement. The agreement also provided lifetime medical benefits and burial services for surviving participants, as well as health benefits for their immediate family members affected by the study. While the settlement offered some measure of compensation, many argued that it fell short of addressing the full extent of harm inflicted. The emotional trauma, loss of life, and generational impacts could not be adequately remedied through financial means alone. Moreover, the settlement did not result in criminal charges or significant professional repercussions for those directly responsible for orchestrating and perpetuating the study. The scandal, however, did precipitate substantial reforms in medical research ethics and regulations. In 1974, the National Research Act was enacted, establishing the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research. This commission was tasked with developing guidelines to ensure the ethical conduct of research involving human subjects. One of the commission's most significant contributions was the 1979 Belmont Report, which articulated 3 fundamental ethical principles: respect for persons, acknowledging autonomy and securing informed consent; beneficence, maximizing benefits and minimizing harms, and justice, ensuring fair distribution of research benefits and burdens. These principles became the cornerstone of modern research ethics, guiding policies and practices across medical and scientific communities. Additionally, institutional review boards, IRBs, were mandated for all research involving human subjects, providing critical oversight to evaluate and monitor studies for ethical compliance. These boards serve as essential safeguards against abuse, ensuring that research protocols adhere to established ethical standards and that participants' rights and welfare are protected. The legacy of the Tuskegee Syphilis study thus prompted a paradigm shift in how medical research is conducted and regulated, emphasizing transparency, accountability, and respect for human dignity. The Tuskegee Syphilis study left an indelible scar on the collective consciousness of African American communities, fostering deep-seated mistrust toward medical institutions and government agencies. This mistrust has had enduring and detrimental effects on public health outcomes and healthcare engagement among African Americans. Fear and skepticism stemming from the study have contributed to lower rates of participation in medical research and clinical trials among African Americans, resulting in underrepresentation and gaps in knowledge about health issues affecting these communities. This hesitancy extends to preventive care and treatment adherence, with many individuals expressing reluctance to seek medical attention due to concerns about discrimination, exploitation, and mistreatment. The consequences are evident in persistent health disparities, including higher rates of chronic diseases, lower life expectancy, and disproportionate impacts from health crises, such as the HIV/AIDS epidemic and, more recently, the COVID-19 pandemic. The lack of trust hampers public health initiatives, vaccination efforts, and effective disease management, perpetuating cycles of poor health outcomes and inequality. Efforts to rebuild trust have been ongoing but challenging. Community-based healthcare models, increased representation of African Americans in medical professions, culturally competent care, and transparent communication are critical components of these efforts. Recognizing and addressing the historical and contemporary factors contributing to mistrust are essential for fostering equitable and effective healthcare systems. Acknowledging past wrongs is a fundamental step toward healing and preventing future injustices. It was not until May 16, 1997, 65 years after the study began and 25 years after its end, that the U.S. government issued a formal apology. President Bill Clinton, in a moving address, expressed profound regret for the government's role in the study, stating,
"To a time not so very long ago that many Americans would prefer not to remember, but we dare not forget. It was a time when our nation failed to live up to its ideals, when our nation broke the trust with our people that is the very foundation of our democracy. It is not only in remembering that shameful past that we can make amends and repair our nation, but it is in remembering that past that we can build a better present and a better future. And without remembering it, we cannot make amends and we cannot go forward." So today, America does remember the hundreds of men used in research without their knowledge and consent.
The apology, delivered in the presence of surviving participants and their families, was a significant gesture, acknowledging the suffering inflicted and the government's responsibility. It also underscored a commitment to ethical standards and the protection of human rights in medical research and practice. The lessons learned from the Tuskegee Syphilis study are numerous and critical. Foremost is the imperative of respecting and upholding the dignity, autonomy, and rights of all individuals, regardless of race or socioeconomic status. Informed consent, transparency, and ethical oversight are non-negotiable components of responsible research and medical care. The study also highlights the destructive power of racism and discrimination within institutions and the necessity of actively confronting and dismantling these systemic injustices. Diversity, inclusion, and cultural sensitivity must be integral to healthcare and research to ensure equitable treatment and outcomes. Ongoing education and reflection on the Tuskegee syphilis study are essential for maintaining awareness of these issues and reinforcing commitments to ethical practices. Commemorating and honoring the victims serves as a reminder of the past and a cautionary tale for the future, inspiring vigilance and accountability to prevent similar atrocities. The Tuskegee syphilis study remains a profound and painful illustration of medical racism and ethical failure. Its legacy continues to influence medical ethics, public health policies, and the relationship between marginalized communities and healthcare institutions. By examining and understanding this dark chapter, society can strive to honor the victims through meaningful reforms, foster trust and equity in healthcare, and ensure that such violations of human rights are never repeated. The study serves as a powerful reminder of the responsibility borne by medical and scientific communities to conduct research with integrity, compassion, and respect for all individuals. It underscores the necessity of continual reflection, education, and proactive measures to uphold ethical standards and protect the welfare of all participants in medical endeavors. In learning from the past, we can build a more just, equitable, and humane future for all.